What's good YouTube, it's your boy Pokeface here and we are back with a new video here on the channel. So if you like what you're seeing, drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel. As always, your support is greatly appreciated. So now, onto the video. Starter Pokemon. They define your lifelong Pokemon journey. They define the trainer you are, the trainer you'll become, and in general, they just define Pokemon. These Pokemon are just like babies that you need to nurture, feed, train, and love. As you watch them grow into these big, lovable characters that will fight along your side. So it makes sense with Gen 8 coming out this year to make a series of videos telling us exactly which starter is the best from each trio in each respective region. And in this episode, we'll be talking about the Alola region and the three starters, Litten, Rowlet, and Popplio. So let's start with Litten. Now, everyone loves cats, and especially tabby cats, and that's exactly what Litten's based on. You can see by the coloration and the kind of stripes that are on Litten that it must be based on a tabby cat. It is the fire cat Pokemon, and we can see from its name, Litten, that it's probably based on lit, like to light a fire, and kitten meaning obviously a baby cat. It has a really cool shiny, which is true throughout the evolution line. Like that white coloration contrasting with the red is really cool. But if you look at, for example, the fact that Litten has this oily skin and it uses that oil to help with its fire type moves, it then comes into perspective that probably don't want to be holding Litten that much unless you like your hands getting oily. Litten then evolves into Torracat, which is kind of short for torrid and cat, torrid coming from the burning and obviously it being a cat. There's nothing cool about Torracat, it's just like a bigger version of Litten, a sort of teenage version, kind of based on a tiger cub crossed with a cat. But yeah, again, cool shiny, but that's kind of it. But then Torracat evolves into Incineroar. Now everyone has their own views on Incineroar. I don't have a problem with it becoming bipedal. It might have been cooler if it stayed on all fours, but I think the fact that it's a tiger and it's bipedal, it makes him look less hard or like bad in a good way. But what is cool is that Incineroar's design matches exactly what they were trying to do at the Pokemon Company. He is a wrestler, he is known as the heel Pokemon, and now if you don't know much about sort of wrestling lore, a heel is a person that takes on this persona of a bad person and has that kind of Batman vibe. It's probably the best way to explain it, because to the world it looks like a bad person or an immoral person, but in reality a heel isn't that kind of person. So that's quite cool. It has got like a world champion sort of belt around its waist, which does also give off fire. He is also a fire dark type, which is something I think people wanted more than the firefighting, simply because of how popular firefighting was throughout the other starters in other regions, and it was kind of looking like when he became bipedal and was quite obviously based on a wrestler that he would end up being that firefighting type, but he doesn't do that. And the reason being, it is the heal Pokemon. Like I said, I explained what heal is, and it links to that dark side, or showing that dark side to people, and so it makes sense why he is this fire dark type. But yeah, that will be all for the Litten evolution line. Sadly, it makes third place on my list. I'm sorry to you guys that love the lineup, but I'm not saying I hate it, I just say compared to the other two starters, it doesn't really match up. But now let's move on to Rowlet and Popplio. I won't be giving you the ranking until the very end so that we can keep a bit of suspense for it. Let's start with Popplio. So Popplio is the sea lion Pokemon, and it shares a category with both Seal and Dugong for that reason. It is based on the sea lion and has elements of a circus clown in it as well, as we can see by the collar that it is wearing. Its name origin probably comes from Pop being from like the lion pup or sea lion pup, as well as being pop like to pop a bubble, which it creates using its nose.
Also, the word for ball in Hawaiian is popo, and so it could also come from that as well. This is the thing, I think Popplio and Rowlet both have a lot more Hawaiian ties, and that's why they're higher up the list compared to the Litten lineup. Because I think these kind of lore and backgrounds that link to the region and what the region's based off is what makes Pokemon quite cool. As well as the second part obviously being Leo. Leo coming from, I think it's the Latin for lion, which obviously links to sea lion, but as well as the Hawaiian for monk seal being Yoholo Eka Uawa, and it has that Leo at the beginning. And I think Popplio is meant to be based on the Hawaiian monk seal, and so again it links to Hawaii for that reason, and yet that's another really cool reason for Popplio, or the Japanese name Ashimari, being higher up compared to Litten. We look at Popplio, we look at its shiny sprite, and I'm not too big a fan of its shiny. I think that shinies that are very different are a bit cooler than the shinies that are only a little bit different. With a few exceptions, obviously. I do like the Zapdos shiny, for example. But I do like the pink color on Popplio shiny, I think it is quite cool. But besides that, its design is very cute. There's nothing really to complain about. Popplio evolves into Brionne, and Brionne is known as the Popstar Pokemon. This just shows a contrast in the personality that is changed when it evolves. Now, Brionne looks a lot less like a clown, which were the elements you saw in Popplio, and it looks a bit more like a pop star, and so we think it might be based on, for example, J-pop, which is obviously something big in Japan, as well as maybe ballerinas, and a few hints of circus clown, because the nose is still there, and the nose kind of resembled that of a clown. It is still obviously a sea lion, and the name origin is probably based on brio, which means, or is a type of vivacity, of style, or performance, as well as Brionne coming from brine, meaning obviously seawater, and ondine, which is, according to Bulbapedia, a type of female water nymph or mermaid. Again, it's shiny, isn't too different, it's just a bit of a darker version. Not too bad. I think it's a bit better than Popplio shiny, but yes, now that pink collar has become a part of its longer skirt. So it is quite a feminine Pokemon, even Primarina as well. Popplio was a bit more of a mix, but there's nothing wrong with that. But then Brionne evolves into Primarina. Now Primarina is a very cool Pokemon. So Primarina is the soloist Pokemon, and you can see that by the kind of vibes it gives off. It is a bit like a singer, and it has this Water Fairy type. And Water Fairy type is a very good typing. We see it on Azumarill, and in general it's very good typing. It does add another weakness to the Pokemon, but with that one weakness, having the Fairy type means that you're immune to Dragon type moves, and it is pretty decent on the offense as well. But if we look at Primarina's design a bit more, I think it has the best shiny out of the three in that lineup, with that new blonde hair, which adds to the sort of pop star soloist sort of vibe that it gives off. It also has one of the highest base special attack, special defense, and single base stats of all fully evolved Stars Pokemon, so that is quite cool. If we look at its origin, again it's still a sea lion, but it also shares elements with a mermaid and sirens, as well as the Shetland British idea of Selkies. Now Selkies are just seals that have the ability to become humans when they shed their skin, and you can kind of see that kind of shedding through the dress that Primarina wears, so you can understand where that comes from. This idea of sirens are really cool, because when you look at Hawaii, you think of the sea that surrounds those islands, and we always hear stories in the sea about sirens being spotted or mermaids being spotted, and we know that the background between sirens is that what they do is they sing to you, or they call to you, they attract you, and then they kill you. And that kind of shows a contrast in persona, in personality, very similar to that of the heal Pokemon Incineroar. So the way a heal Pokemon would show the world that they're a bad person, but in reality they just take the blame for people, they're really good people. In the same way, Primarina has the opposite sort of effect, where it shows the world it's really cute, it's really attractive, has a very good singing voice, and then draws you in and essentially can kill you. And so I think that is quite cool that it has that. And then if we look at Primarina's name origin, so it has that Prim, which could link to Prima Donna, considering it is a soloist Pokemon, and that transition from a pop star Pokemon to a soloist Pokemon means that it's now on its own footing and rather be singular compared to maybe a J-pop star, for example, that would be in a group. It also has this Marina part of its name, obviously Marina linking to marine Pokemon or marine animals, as well as this idea of ballerina, again linking aspects of the fact that it might be a dancer, a singer, a showcase sort of Pokemon.
But now let's move on to the final Alolan starter, and that is Rowlet, the grass quill Pokemon. Now Rowlet is the grass type starter from the Alolan region, and it is an owl Pokemon, and it has a lot of roots to different types of owls, as we can see in its origin. It is also the lightest starter Pokemon, and it is also the second basic starter Pokemon to have a dual typing after Bulbasaur's grass poison, and that's because obviously Rowlet is a grass flying type. And because of this, Rowlet is the only starter Pokemon that is a member of the flying egg group, so that is quite cool as well. But we go into that origin, and we know Rowlet is clearly based on an owl. It shares a lot of similarities to barn owls, which have those dark patches around its eyes, and in particular it relates to the common barn owl, which was introduced to Hawaii. So we get that link again, just like with some of Poplio's stuff, to Hawaii, as well as links to the eastern grass owl or the African grass owl. And because it's a grass owl, you can understand why it gets this grass typing from. But if we look at the general design of it now, it has this really cool bow tie, which adds this sense of suaveness and adds its own uniqueness to the Pokemon. It also has this overcoat of feathers, which have a different color to the undercoat, and what that does, it creates like an almost blazer, jacket or waistcoat sort of vibe that comes from Rowlet, which again adds to this idea of it being a suave Pokemon. And then we go on to the name origin. So its name origin probably comes from Rao, from it being round, and Owlet, which is a baby owl, and the name itself could link quite heavily to the word arrow as well, arrow, Rowlet. I'm not too big a fan of Rowlet Shiny. I think that it does give off more of a grass vibe considering it has a green overcoat, but besides that it stays relatively similar, and personally I'd rather have the original Rowlet compared to a shiny Rowlet. Rowlet then evolves into the Blade Quill Pokemon Dartrix. So you can already see that it's going from Grass Quill to Blade Quill, and it just shows the difference in strength or what it's using in terms of ammunition. It's still a grass flying type, still carries that dual typing, but if we look at its origin, Dartrix still looks like it's based on a stilt owl or barn owl. And then if we look at its name origin, Dartrix is probably a combination of dart, considering it's now the Blade Quill Pokemon, so it'll be throwing darts rather than grass quills or feathers, and obviously quills just meaning feathers. And as well as the tricks part coming from maybe tricks. Now that could be based on the tricks that it uses its quills for, but it also may link heavily to the genus Strix, which refers to a multitude of different types of owls that do have this genus, including the stilt owl, which is known as the Gralistrix in its scientific name. And so Dartrix has that Trix as well. Or it may also link to the magician sort of vibe it gives off. Now normally I attribute Dartrix to a snooker champion because they have that waistcoat, that bow tie, and he has that quiff in his hair. Now that can be attributed to both the generic snooker player as well as magicians, but I think what Pokemon were trying to go for is a bit more of the magician sort of vibe. Adding to the blazer waistcoat look, if we look at the back of the Pokemon, you can see these two things hanging out, which adds to that jacket look. We look at its shiny. Its shiny is a bit better in my opinion compared to Rowlet shiny. It is a bit of a darker green, which I kind of like more than the lighter green that was used on Rowlet. The quiff changes color, which is also quite cool, as well as the bow, so you see a bit more of a difference in that coloration. And so yeah, I do like the design a bit more, but in terms of lore and origin, it is very similar to that of Rowlet, and so we don't really need to talk about it too much. Dartrix then evolves from the Blade Quill Pokemon into the Arrow Quill Pokemon. So you can see that Pokemon had this idea of changing the quills that it uses or the ammunition it uses throughout its evolution line, which is quite cool. Decidueye is what it evolves into, and it changes its typing into Grass Ghost. And now this is the first time this happens in starter Pokemon, where it would change from one dual typing to another dual typing. Of course, the only other examples we have is Bulbasaur, which keeps its Grass Poison type throughout its evolution line. And if we look at the origin of Decidueye, we can see that it is based still on an owl, quite obviously, the common barn owl for example, as well as the stilt owl. But now I think there's more of a distinction when you look at the stilt owl, because if you look at stilt owl's legs, they're very similar to that of Decidueye because of the way it stands up and the way it portrays itself. Moreover, if we look at its ghost typing and why it's got this ghost typing, there's multiple reasons for this. For example, the common barn owl is known as the ghost owl in some territories within Hawaii, and that is again because of the dark coloration around barn owl's eyes and the way they portray themselves at night time specifically. And so you can get that kind of ghost vibe when you see Decidueye, and that may have been one of the many reasons why he got this typing. But I think it's more because of the stilt owl and the idea that the stilt owl actually is an extinct species, and so that completely links to that ghost typing. And I think it just adds to another level of coolness, because it just shows that we had Rowlet, we had Dartrix, and now they've all gone extinct. So when it evolves into practically a dead Pokemon, which is Decidueye. But now let's move on to this idea of Hawaiian lore and mythology. It is most similar to that of the Pueo owl in particular, and we know that the common physical forms that Omakua, which is one of the ancestral spirits of Hawaii, takes, would have been that of a shark or an owl. So we do get more of this mythology coming from Hawaii, and this depiction of a godlike deity within Decidueye. Also in terms of the design, we get this Robin Hood vibe. In particular, I really like because he's actually wearing a hood, so when he pulls on those two strings of his hoodie, which used to be his bow tie, it closes up his hood, which when I saw the concept art initially, long before the games came out, I thought was amazing, and so that's why I really wanted it to be the actual artwork. The blazer designs have kind of gone away now because he has more of an overcloak, which again links to that of the cloak that Robin Hood would wear in British history, and he uses that cloak as his bow for his archery, and he is the Arrow Quill Pokemon, and so he uses his quills as arrows in this case, and again using that hoodie string as the string for his bow. The idea of Robin Hood, he steals from the rich, gives to the poor. So you look at Decidueye's descriptions from Pokemon, it can do a lot of things very, very fast, and so it can go unrecognized because of that, again adding to this idea of a ghost that moves without being recognized. If we look at the name origin, Decidueye obviously coming from the word deciduous. Now if you look at plant biology or botany, deciduous plants are basically the plants or trees that you see that give off their leaves normally during autumn time, which adds to these tones of death and this ghost-like feature that Decidueye has, as well as this idea of maybe Deadeye or Bullseye coming from the eye part of Decidueye, which links to how accurate maybe Decidueye is, and the fact that it is using arrow quills and a bow and arrow to shoot at its target, showing what it's trying to do with those arrow quills. It's not just doing demonstrations, he's using it to fight. And considering it's based on an animal that's extinct, it's still trying to maybe take revenge for its death, and so we get all those kinds of attributes coming out of its origin, coming out of its name origin, and it just adds to how cool of a Pokemon Decidueye can be. Then we look into its shiny form. Now Decidueye has, in my opinion, the best shiny out of all three Alolan starters, and one of the best shinies in general. I like it when shinies link to a dark side. You look at the Charizard shiny or the Greninja shiny, again two of my favorite shinies, and we have the same sort of vibe coming out of the Decidueye shiny, and it adds more to that ghost or deadly sort of vibe that he has. Because it's now black, he's going to be even harder to see in that nighttime, and it makes him look even more
like an extinct Pokemon. And then his orange parts of his body, so his bow tie and part of his beak that is orange, turns red. Red obviously linking more to blood, which again adds that deadly sort of contrast to Decidueye, and is one of the many reasons why I do like its shiny. Also, in terms of its changing in typing, I think it is a bit better, and I think people would have rather it changed to the Grass Ghost type, because it hasn't got that 4 times weakness to ice moves, which is always good. It then gets an immunity to both normal and fighting type moves, which again is really cool, but it does add that weakness to both ghost and dark type moves. So I think it is a bit of a trade-off, but personally I like it a lot better than the grass flying type. And when it was revealed to us that it is a grass ghost type, with those final evolutions coming out in one of their trailers. So before I make my final decision, I would like to say shout out to the Pokemon Company for making 3 really cool starters. I do like all of them for different reasons, but at the same time I do have my favorites. Also, shout out to the fact that the Pokemon Company kept a theme along their starters the same way they did with Gen 6. I think that was really cool. So obviously in Gen 6 they had a mage, a knight and a ninja, and in Sun and Moon they have a theme which is based on personality. So we look at the healed Pokemon Incineroar having that persona outwardly that, you know, they're a bad person so they can take the blame for the world and the badness in the world. And then we have Primarina, which on the outside is this really good looking Pokemon, attractive Pokemon, but like I said, the link to a siren which will end up attracting you and then killing you. And then the Robin Hood vibe that comes from Decidueye. And so they all have this sort of dual personality, and that is shown throughout all 3 starters. And so I think that's the kind of theme that Pokemon were trying to go with. Also, before I tell you my final decision, which we will get to, don't worry, take it with a pinch of salt, because questions like this that I'm trying to answer on the channel are highly subjective. There is no actual right or wrong answer. But yeah, so like I said, take it with a pinch of salt, and we'll get to the decision right now. And so the best Alolan starter, in my opinion, has to be, without a shadow of doubt, Popplio.
You suck!
Or at least that's what I would be saying if it was Popplio, but Popplio sucks, and so it has to be Rowlet. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.